Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. And tonight we're very, very pleased to have the legendary Kevin Sullivan on the podcast, the Gamesmaster, the Taskmaster, amongst other well-earned nicknames. Kevin, how are you doing today, sir?
Jack, I'm doing fabulous. Thank you very much. It's great to be on the show. I know how great your company's doing, and kudos to you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to start off by talking about your big appearance where you are booked to come in on May the 6th, Saturday, at Earl Armstrong Arena in Ottawa, where you will be doing a meet and greet and a signing, which is a big deal considering I don't believe you've been in Ontario since WCW and managing the very, very feared Blood Hunter. Can I get your thoughts on this big event, given that it's the 15th anniversary of Great North Wrestling and a bit of a milestone for yourself?
Well, the milestone really is the Great Northwest Company. I mean, 15 years, you guys are doing something right. That says it all. And congratulations.
Thank you.
I'll be there May 6th, and I really like coming to Canada. I haven't been in a long time. I spent some time years ago for the Sheik when he was working for the Bearman. One of the best times of my life was we wrestle and go drive probably 50 miles, stay in a nice hotel, and then wrestle that night and drive 50 more miles. It was great. It was fabulous. People are great. I mean, they are, at one time, I believe in my heart that Toronto and Montreal were the two hottest wrestling cities in North America, if not the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And your name is indelibly linked in a number of those historical moments. Just wanted to get your thoughts in the more recent past in terms of managing the Blood Hunter. I've heard you say on other interviews that the Blood Hunter is perhaps the most dangerous wrestler that you've managed to date, and I'm wondering what your strategy is accompanying such a charge to the ring.
Well, years ago, I'm sure you know this, Jack, the mantle of the most dangerous man in professional wrestling was Dick the Bruiser. Well, my belief is, and I wrestled Dick a couple of times at the tail end of his career, the Blood Hunter has surpassed him, and that mantle is his now. Until you stand beside him, you don't realize how big he is. He's 260 pounds. He's chiseled. He knows karate. He knows judo. He's boxed. He's wrestled. I mean, this guy is the most dangerous man. And besides his athletic background, is that he's a little off. I mean, when you say, what is my strategy? My strategy is I'm going to walk him to the ring and just watch the carnage that he's going to do. I mean, his opponents, I have to give them credit. I don't think even my best days I would have gotten in the ring with him, because you're going to end up, there's a reason why he's called the Blood Hunter. You're going to end up with broken bones, broken ribs, and you're going to bleed. I mean, he is, without a doubt, in my head, and I think it's across Canada and parts of the United States, because he's been barred in some states like Texas and Oklahoma. This guy has a switch. It's like, to me, back in the day when you watch these the Pinky Blinders and you see dog fighting. He's one of those people that, you take the chain off of him, there's no stopping him. And he hurts people really bad. Sometimes when it's all over, I almost feel guilty for him going so far overboard. And the thing about him is he can go through a table with the guy is stretched out and he is unscathed. I mean, he's like one of those dogs you could, back in the day, like I said, Pinky Blinders, where they beat the dog and beat the dog after he's ripped the other dog's throat out and they're trying to pull him off and they can't. This guy is a special person. It's not for the weak of heart, but if you want to see an incredible athlete, because he is, I mean, he gets up like, I don't know, you do better, but I think he gets up at 6 o'clock, he runs 10 miles, he goes to the gym, lifts these enormous weights, then he goes and does boxing or wrestling or MMA. I mean, there's a switch in him that most people, I'm going to rephrase that when I said most people, very few people have.
Are you familiar with, I'm sure you are, his opponent, former TNA World Heavyweight Champion Cowboy James Storm? Because it would seem to me that the Cowboy could most certainly put up an excellent opposition to the Blood Hunter. All that notwithstanding what you just said to be true.
Well, Jack, in my head, if I was going to pick somebody that could get in the ring and give the Blood Hunter a run for his money and maybe defeat him because he's a great athlete, former world's champion, and I know that accolade is thrown around quite a bit, world's champion, but he is a real world champion. And I think this is going to be the Blood Hunter's biggest match of his career. I know he knows that. I mean, as we're talking, he's probably running up hills with 50 pounds on his back. But the Cowboy, don't underestimate him. I've put the Blood Hunter over, but he better have everything going right for him, the Blood Hunter, because he can't afford to make one mistake. And the thing that I see that could tilt this to the Cowboy is that the Blood Hunter sometimes gets into this fit of rage where he sees red rats, where he just on the attack. Now, Storm is a very, very great technical wrestler. And if the Blood Hunter makes one mistake when he's riled up, sometimes the offense works against you. And I'm not going to put my man down, but if he makes a mistake and he leaves an opening for a technical wrestling hold, it could end his undefeated streak.
Well, we're very pleased to have that match signed as our main event for May the 6th. First time ever that confrontation is taking place, and also very pleased to have you on board. And I know the fans are looking forward to seeing you and shaking your hand. Speaking of which, we have a fan question from Grandma Daisy before we get into our questions, which is the grandma is asking for some Matt Bourne stories, I guess, generically.
Great second generation. His father was Tough Tony Bourne, who was a staple in Portland and Washington and Vancouver. But Matt was a great amateur wrestler, tough as nails. When I was tag team with Mark Lewin in Florida, we used to go to Texas and wrestle him and Buzz Sawyer. And it was not an easy night. Matt was terrific. Great question.
Moving back a bit in terms of the start of your career, the research that I've done indicates that you had your first match in Montreal, and you were an amateur competitor up to that point, and really wasn't trained per se professionally before you had that first match. How did that sequence of events take place that you switched from amateur to pro in that fashion?
This is probably the strangest. If you can find a story more appealing than this story about me getting it, I'd like to hear it. I used to wrestle for the Boston YMC Union. It's the second oldest athletic club in the United States. The first is the New York Athletic Club. And I wrestled in for the Waltham Boys Club. I wrestled for the Cambridge YMCA. So I was working out, getting ready for a tournament. And this guy came in and he said, can I work out with you? I said, sure. He's a very capable amateur wrestler. His history was he graduated from Oxford, Harvard Business School, and he was part of the DeBerry family, the diamond people in South Africa. He had been on television and soap operas. He was a male model, great athlete. He competed in amateur wrestling in South Africa, but his family didn't want the stigma of pro wrestler, you know what I mean? But so he used to go up to Montreal, and in Brooklyn, he would wrestle under an alias. And we started working out, and we became friends. And one day he said to me, I'm going up to Montreal to wrestle. You ever think about being a pro wrestler? I said, yeah, of course. But I wouldn't know how to get in it. He said, well, I'll take you up, and maybe there'll be a place on the card. And he brought me up, and that was it. I started wrestling in Montreal, and then I was going with him to Brooklyn and back and forth. And then I eventually went to West Virginia, where there was a territory. And you heard the name, of course, Gypsy Joe.
Yes.
Yeah, him and his pseudo brother, they were the Madrill brothers, and they owned West Virginia. So that was my first real territory. The other ones were like what we call independents now.
Wow, quite a story. A fan on social media asks about your tag team with Austin Idol in Georgia when you faced the young, fabulous Freebirds, and wants to know what they were they as crazy, so to speak, at that time, or what were they like to work with at that early stage of their career?
They were fabulous. Terry Gordy was a protege. And he was also, he was one of the smoothest big men I've ever seen. His footwork was impeccable. He was 270 pounds, big shoulders, big chest, big country boy. But he could move like a middleweight. He was terrific. And Buddy Roberts was a great hand, great wrestler. And then Michael Hayes was a genius, and we're seeing that today. And not just today, but, you know, he's been part of the WWE company for years. And Michael's one of the smartest guys I ever met.
What speaking of Gordy, what were your thoughts of the attempt by the WWF, WWE during the Attitude Era to bring him back as the executioner? Do you recall that?
Yeah, I remember that, and I understood what they were trying to do. I give hats off to Michael. Terry was not the Terry Gordy once was, and he was trying to give him a payday. And he was a shadow of his former self.
In switching now to when you were up until this point, you were a baby face, but then when you had a program with Steve Kern and you turned on him and won the NWA TV championship, was that an adjustment for you? Because most fans remember Kevin Sullivan as the diabolical heel. Was that a switch for you to go from baby to heel, and did that feel more natural to you per se?
Yes, it did. Occasionally, back in the day when I first started, if I had a babyface match, I'd get some heel moves in. I felt much more comfortable as being a heel.
What who came up with the idea to switch you?
At that time, a guy gets a lot of knocking is Ole Anderson. But Ole said to me, I think you and Kern would be better fighting one another than being partners. So that's what happened.
Interesting. Fan Jake Walker wants to know, how was it working with King Curtis?
One of the highlights of my career. You know, we always talk about great talkers. If you ask Dusty Rhodes, who's one of the greatest talkers of all times, if you ask superstar Billy Graham, one of the greatest talkers of all times, if you asked Ric Flair and numerous guys from my era, it begins with Curtis and ends with Curtis. I mean, one time in Hawaii, when it was called the 50th state wrestling, they had a minute left to go, and they didn't want to go off the air, so the promoter Francis, Russ Francis's dad, sent Curtis out there to count from 60 to 0. And Curtis had his back turned to the audience and counted down. And every second, the ratings went up. He was a phenomenal talker. And a very intelligent guy. Went to Berkeley, played football for the BCs and the BC Lions. Played football for the BC Lions. Was a champion surfer when the infancy of surfing. He was just, they used to call him the Bull. He was a magnificent athlete, but a very intelligent guy. And I love to be around him because nobody could tell us spin a yarn like Curtis could.
And just we'll get to this in a bit, but were you instrumental in bringing him into WCW during that time frame?
Absolutely. I thought, if I'm going to do this angle, I got to bring Curtis in, you know, and I acquiesced to Curtis's ability because he was just fabulous.
Yeah, very memorable stuff. In 82, a lot of fans remember your tenure in Florida and the whole which is as a kid where I became aware of Kevin Sullivan through the magazines, mostly the After magazines, when you had that Prince of Darkness occult leader type gimmick. And of course the world was enraptured by the whole satanic panic phenomenon with the backward masking on the rock music and Ozzy, et cetera, et cetera. But how did you come up with that? And if you had to look at it from the perspective of history, were you concerned about or did you foresee the significant outrage that some folks had, or outright fear to yourself in that presentation?
Yes, I did, but you kind of hit it right on the nose. There was the fear during that era, but MTV had just started. Michael Jackson, Thriller, Billy Idol, White Wedding, and then there was the horror genre blew up again, and heavy metal. There was a lot of things going on that I could take from real life and put it in there. And then because I had to travel extensively with Mark and Curtis to the Orient and the Near and Far East, I always learned things. So we have this provincial thing in North America about everything foreign is bad. It doesn't follow our guidelines. So I relied heavily on that. And then having Curtis as my straight man, I mean, not Curtis, rather, Gordon Soley as my straight man. He could just make a face with utter disgust and not say anything to me. And the people were reading his facial expressions, which really got it over.
Was it true? Some of the information that I've read that you were so into the gimmick, if you will, that you would go out to grocery stores in Florida with a snake and in full deal there.
Well, I wouldn't bring a snake in, but I would wear the black. Me and Mark would go to groceries, and we wore the black robe and the purple robe because I'm spouting all this magical stuff for my interviews. Mark's banging his head, and back then, even though Florida was a big population, when you're in Tampa, you run into the same people all the time. It's a very unique place. And how could I be doing that and then going out with a polo shirt and a pair of slacks? It would have killed the gimmick and wouldn't have gotten over. And I think that helped us. We used to drive to the towns with our robes on. So I think it was the people that first maybe didn't buy the gimmick. Someone would say, I saw them in the grocery stores, like you said, and they embellished the stories. They had two snakes, and he threw a fireball, but I had the robe. We had the robes on, so they helped get us over the fence.
Yeah, it would be a heck of a thing to be browsing the vegetables and see yourself and Mr. Lewin. I think I would go the other way for sure.
Yeah.
Have another fan question. Randall wants to know, what was it like working with Harley Race back in the day?
I only worked with Holly a few times because he was a heel. But I don't think he gets the credit he deserves to be one of the great world champions. There was no wasted motion, and everything he did was on the button. I mean, that knee drop, the dive off the top rope. Holly was a complete technician. And I used to love to watch Harley and Terry Funk wrestle. I mean, that was some of the classic matches of all times.
Absolutely. Before we leave the Army of Darkness stable and the whole Prince of Darkness gimmick, did you get a lot of backlash from the public, from buildings or whatever, that made you segue away from? Because if memory serves me correct, you somewhat tempered the whole magic stuff as the gimmick went on, or was that just a natural progression?
Well, I had gone as far as I could because I had Dusty and Blackjack and Barry and Mike Graham as my opponents most of the time. And they were really over in Florida. And that's when 85% or 90% of the territory went to Crockett. So the people didn't go behind a lot of those new guys, and they were green. And I thought, well, I can't be spouting this because I have to have a superhero to fight a supervillain, where I was actually people were starting to turn me. And I said, I got to make the best of it.
In Florida, perhaps, and you just touched on him, one of your most notable and bloody opponents was Dusty Rhodes. Why do you think you had such great chemistry there, other than, you know, the obvious? But these are matches that are so legendary to this day, and especially for the amount of bloodshed. I remember being enraptured by that feud as a kid.
Well, Dusty was, you know, the hard time interview that he's done sums up who Dusty was. I wrestled Dusty for almost 3 years straight in some kind of, if it wasn't him, it was Mulligan. Or if it wasn't Mulligan, it was Barry. They were cowboys. Florida was much more rural then. You know, I don't know if this is still true, but at one time, Florida was the #1 cattle raising state in the Union, more than Texas. So there was plenty of farmland, but Dusty and Blackjack could talk, and they reached the people. And it was the ultimate evil against the ultimate good, and it just worked so perfectly. And without those guys, we would never gotten over.
Yeah, your feud with Blackjack being legendary as well. You certainly had a number of legendary foils in Florida.
Yes. And in my head, I think Barry Windham is the most underrated babyface of all times. When Barry was a young man and had the blonde hair, and during the match, Mark would distract the referee, and I'd throw Barry over the top rope, and he hardly even touched the top rope. Sometimes he wouldn't; he'd splatter, and I'd look out, and girls would be almost passing out and screaming and crying. He was so over. It was ridiculous. And he was such a great worker. I mean, some of the greatest matches I ever saw in my life was him and Flair. I mean, Barry doesn't get his due. I guess time and injuries might have passed him by. And the other thing about Barry is Barry didn't stay places long. Barry liked to enjoy his life. He'd go into a place and then he'd take 3 months off.
Which is an interesting question that you raised by discussing Barry. Couldn't agree more. What one heck of a worker. It a lot of fans have asked, why was it that the promotion, be it Jim Crockett or when Turner bought the organization in WCW, why was it that when Barry was really at his height, having those 1 hour matches with Flair, et cetera, that they never put the belt on him? They never put the world title on him.
This is just my take, and I don't have the complete answer, and I don't have all the facts because I don't think anybody does. Barry and Dusty were very close, and Dusty was grooming him to be the world champion. Dusty told me that on many occasions. But you know how I mentioned Barry would take 3 months off? There was a period when the territory was doing really good. Florida was really doing great. I mean, you always hear the old timers, my generation, they were hanging from the rafters. Well, maybe not hanging from the rafters, but they were doing huge business. In Florida, people were making money. I mean, big money for the time. And Barry came to Dusty and said, I'm going to go surfing for a while. And he went to California, and, you know, Barry would go into a town and he'd go to the exotic car dealership and rent himself a Lamborghini or some fast car. And he was a single guy. and he, girls just threw their home keys at him. And when he did that, it kind of soured them on Barry, and that's how Magnum got his push, I believe.
Were you surprised when Wyndham turned on Luger in that famous world tag title match against Tully and Arn and became one of the four horsemen, and his feud with Dusty over that series of bashes? I believe it was 87.
Yeah.
That he got over so well as a heel after being basically the ultimate babyface?
No, because he was so great technically. You know what I mean? Very few heels of my era would let a babyface tell them what to do. But everybody that I knew, including Flair, Barry had something in the ring. We followed what Barry wanted. So Barry was a ring general. I have this theory that second generation guys have a foot up on guys who don't come from a wrestling family. They're in the dressing room when they're 60 years old. Wyatt, I remember him when he was running around in diapers. You know what I mean? So they got this special thing, and they almost by osmosis, they're around these guys that know how to talk, and they get a way to how to talk, and they've seen things and they put it in their memory bank. So it didn't surprise me. And I thought that was a great fit for the Horseman, because if there was a real Horseman besides Rick, it was Barry.
Absolutely. So in 87, you signed with Crockett and came out as the very memorable leader of the Varsity Club. Can you, which a lot of smart fans to this day regard as what a highly underrated stable. Can you tell us how that idea germinated and what it was like working with an amazing technical wrestler in Mike Rotundo and a young Rick Steiner?
Yeah, and then there was Dr. Death and Dan Spivey, all great athletes. And this was all Dusty's call. Dusty could sometimes see something that, even though I think sometimes on the ball, that I never thought Letterman jacket guys would be standing next to a guy in a black robe, right? But that's when the drug scandals in college sports were going on. I avoided that. Dusty did. And, I'm glad that you brought this up, the Varsity Club. Some of the most fun moments I ever had was with him. And I don't think people if they didn't have a long enough run, I'll tell you why. When I came up with the idea of Alex for Steiner, and we were pushing him around, as you remember, the people were turning him. We weren't had any idea to turn him. And I remember one night we were in Baltimore, and Mike, him and I were in a 6-man tag, and the fans were booing me and Mike, but they were cheering Rick. And I went back to Dusty that night. I said, "We got to turn him. We're swimming against the stream, And when we did turn him, it was huge box office."
Absolutely. Did you? Was it your idea to bring in? You touched on it in a later generation of the Varsity Club to have Dangerous Dan Spivey and Dr. Death in. Was that your idea, or was that Dusty's booking as well?
That Spivey and I think Spivey and Dr. Death both were Dusty's, but he was nice enough to ask me what I thought. And, how could you go wrong? you know.
One of the fans on social media wanted to know what it was like with the Varsity Club when they worked the mighty Road Warriors.
Well, sometimes when they work with Steiner and Rotunda, they weren't such mighty road warriors. they were tough guys, but you know, talking about two great amateur wrestlers, you know, and Steiner was made of iron. You couldn't hurt him, you know.
I believe Jim Ross once referred to him and Scott as sacks of concrete, and that certainly looked to be stiff in the ring for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. Rick had just turned babyface against me, and we went to the Boston Gardens, and marvelous Marvin Hager was in the front row. And I said to some of the guys who were playing Ribbensteiner, the Detroit Pistons had just won the NBA title. So I said, Rick, I think you need to go out first, which was really against the grain. So Rick starts down the aisle and they all start going, hoo, like he used to do, right? And I smartened the ring announcer up to this. And the ring announcer said, and here he comes, the dog-faced gremlin, Rick Steiner, and from the home of the new NBA champions, the Detroit Pistons, Rick Steiner. The whole building turned on. I get in the ring and I come down to the ring, and the announcer says, and here he comes, the hometown boy from the city of the greatest NBA franchise in the history, the Boston Celtics. They cheer me. I get in the ring. Biggest mistake I ever made. You can see smoke coming out of his ears. We tie up. He hits me, shoots me into the ropes, and my neck is still screwed up for me 35 years later. He gave me a clothesline, and this was no bump. He knocked me right through the ropes, and I fell on the floor in front of Marvin Hager. I pulled myself up on his chair and said, hey, brother, I need some relief. He said, you're in this, your own, my man. I mean, he was something else, Rick.
No doubt. And his son certainly appears to be, despite the goofy name that they've given him, certainly appears to be a chip off the old block, so to speak.
Certainly is. I mean, I really enjoy watching him because it's like going back in time, you know. Think he's a little taller than Rick, but, you know, he works the same way. Takes no prisoners.
Absolutely. A fan wants to know, actually asked me to ask you if David Von Erich and Magnum TA were supposed to be the world heavyweight champions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. David was going to go first. I believe the order was David. Then I think Rick was supposed to get it back and then give it to Magnum. But tragedies happened.
In your latter part of your your Jim Crockett Promotions tenure, you formed another very successful stable that fans are talking about to this day, and that would be the Slaughterhouse. And a fan on Twitter wanted to know about what it was like when you were guiding the career of a young Cactus Jack at that point.
Oh, he was fabulous right from the start. And I had Buzz Sawyer too, you know, and they were so solid, different performers to say the least. But it was another one that didn't go long enough, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Why was that?
I'm not really sure. I think Herd thought it was, some of the guys didn't fit for Herd, even though he didn't know nothing about wrestling. So I think it might have been maybe me and Cactus, or all three of us.
When you mentioned Jim Herd, a lot of discussion has occurred over the years with respect to his treatment of Ric Flair, and I believe you were quoted many times as saying, "Why do you want to change up, Ric Flair? It's like giving Mickey Mantle another number or something along those lines." What were you thinking at the time with this very, very odd strategy with respect to a man who was a legendary figure even at that point in time?
He wanted to make him Spartacus. He wanted to cut his hair, give him a trident, put an earring in his hair. He said, "We're going to make him Spartacus." And you were close. I said, "Oh, then after that, why don't we go to Yankee Stadium, change Babe Ruth's number from 3 to 47?" You know, it was ridiculous. But I think it was that he hated Rick. He just wanted to destroy. I never understood that. Here you got a guy that at that time was still a traveling champion. He had been a traveling champion, drew all over. And because you don't like him personally, you want to destroy him. And that ain't helping your job. I didn't understand it at all.
And I guess you weren't surprised after Flair went north and the fans were chanting for him. I remember that pay-per-view. I think again it was a Great American Bash where it was Wyndham and Flair, I believe, Wyndham and Luger, and the fans were chanting about wanting Flair. That couldn't have been a surprise to anyone in the know.
No, it wasn't. And that, that was thrown back in his face or its face, and it didn't faze him a bit.
Until he was let go.
Yeah.
After some time off, you returned to WCW in '91, and you're remembered for managing the One Man Gang and Black Blood. Billy Jack Haynes, a man who has been on the Hannibal TV many times, many interviews, and wanted to ask you why do you think that gimmick didn't have longer longevity? It seemed to be really a really good fit with yourself.
With Billy, you mean?
Black Blood.
Yeah, when he was Black Blood, I thought it was a good gimmick too. But again, he had let Dusty down on a few occasions in Florida and the Carolinas. And I think he kind of missed a couple of shows because I've listened to his interviews and now I understand why.
Mm-hmm.
That Dusty said, "Well, if you're missing these shows now when I'm pushing you, I can't afford a no-show in a main event or a semifinal."
Well, that makes sense. In '93, you joined Eastern Championship Wrestling and had a very successful tag team with the Tasmaniac. And a lot of fans speak about that in terms of the potential or the success that Taz later became. Did you see that when you were working with him, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, I did see that because I had known Taz through one of the forgotten heroes of wrestling, Tony Rumble. Tony Rumble had Century Wrestling.
The Boston Bad Boy?
Yeah, you got it. And he was using him before Paul. I got to meet him. I thought he had ability right from the start. And the thing is, when I went to ECW, I was also working in Japan. So it was nice for me when I was going almost every month. So I'd be gone 2 or 3 weeks and I come back. I had 2 weeks off. I go and work for Paul. And I broke Paul into the business.
Did you, when you were working with Taz, did you have any influence on his ring psychology, his style? Did he ask or get a lot of mentoring from you?
Well, he was a smart guy. He had a great outlook. And if he did get mentoring from me, and I'm not saying he did, it was that because we were in a tag team in a high profile matches, he learned very quickly because the guys across the ring from us were veterans. So, I mean, Taz still has a great career.
Have you seen his son Hook in AEW, and what are your thoughts on him?
I like him a lot. I mean, he's a complete 180 degrees from Taz, right? And I like him. He's got that aggressiveness. I like his mannerisms going in the ring. He looks like a star. He acts like a star. I like him.
One of the fans earlier, and this is something that I wanted to ask you when we were in the Florida area, but Mark Lewin is a really legendary figure in the business. He's done very few interviews, and one of the fans on here wanted to know what it was like teaming with him or leading him, and what kind of an athlete he was, and how his ring psychology was so on point.
Dusty Rhodes said Mark Lewin was the greatest heel and greatest baby face he ever saw. And that's saying something from Dusty. He didn't throw accolades around all the time. Mark, I consider myself a pretty good swimmer. Mark was one of the greatest I've ever seen. We used to swim in really treacherous waters. I was way over my head, but he had this calming thing about him, and he was incredibly strong. You didn't realize how big Mark was until you stood beside him. Great handball player, strong power lifter. He looked like $1 million. Fabulous swimmer, fabulous scuba diver, fabulous. Like we go scuba diving, and I used 3/4 of the tank. It looked like he took 10 breaths. You know, he just was an amazing athlete, and he's still he's 86, and he still trains almost every day. Lives in Singapore now.
Good for him. One of the very noteworthy characters ever to be in Florida during your tenure. A fan also wants to know if you were how you were an influence on Hulk Hogan early in his career.
I don't think I was an influence, but one time I was leaving one territory and going to Florida, but I had a nice run in the Gulf Coast area. So I wanted to see some friends. So I stopped on a Friday night and wrestled there, and Hulk was there, and he needed a ride. And I gave him a ride back to Pensacola, and he said, "I think I'm going home. I just don't think I'm cut out for this." I said, "Brother, you are cut out for this. This is you're going to be big." And I never thought he'd be you. You know what I mean? But he was, and we used to see him before he was in the wrestling business. We used to go see him play at the Rocket Lounge in Tampa. He'd be at the matches. Yeah.
And you were later instrumental, I understand, in the heel turn that changed wrestling history with the NWO.
Yeah, I made him sleep at my house the night before. They brought his agent. His agent was trying to talk me out of it. At that time, I lived on the beach there too, and I was a mile from the Ocean Center, and I didn't get in his limo until the show started. I didn't want anybody to talk him out of it, and it was time, and it worked so great.
Yeah, 100%. Going back a bit into WCW in 1994, the famous stable that a lot of folks still talk about, the Faces of Fear and the Dungeon of Doom, was created, and so many great folks involved in that, from Kamala to John Tenta and Vader for a short period of time. Given the fact that many still talk about that, could you walk the fans through about how that was created and what what the was it simply put together to be this kind of mythological opposition to Hulk Hogan, because everybody still talks about those videos?
Well, was they were all Hulk's friends. And wrestling had started to really turn at that time. I brought in the cruiserweights. I brought in the luchadors. I was the first one to bring the luchadors in with Conan's assistance. I brought in Ray. Things were changing rapidly. So I knew I had to keep them working. So I knew he wanted to work with his friends. When he got to WCW, he was a little uncomfortable because he didn't know the players. And I said, well, if I put them all in one unit, I won't take up a lot of TV time for the change that's coming. So I went with the video packages and the outlandish characters because that's what he had done in New York, and I wanted to make him feel comfortable.
And when you saw it play out, did you have any idea that it would be as really successful as it was? And what led to moving on from that angle, given the success that it had?
Well, I think it had run its course, and wrestling had really changed. You know, now we have the luchadors in, high flying luchadors. We have the cruiserweights. We have some international guys, Finley, Dave Taylor, Regal. It was a whole conglomerate of complete change. And I thought, whoa, this is kind of dragging the show down. And Hogan had ran his gamut with the Dungeon of Doom. It was time to say goodbye.
So in '96, Brian Pillman really kicked off the whole loose cannon gimmick with his the immortal words, "I respect you, Booker Man," and that match at Super Brawl. Can you let the Hannibal TV viewers know what you were thinking when that happened, and were you aware of what Pillman had planned?
Well, Brian and I were friends. He really, really was a very smart guy. You know, with him passing, we didn't just lose a great performer. We might have lost when we're talking about bookers, we might have lost the greatest booker there could have been. Brian really thought out of the box. He came to me one time, and I don't know if you ever heard this story about Mark Madden. He wanted Mark Madden's pass. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think Mark knew what he was really going to do. He was going to, at the Super Bowl, he was going to have a bunch of chains and run across and get naked, except for his underwear, and chain himself to the goalpost. You know, he would probably done 90 days in the nut house, right? But he really wanted to work. And he came up with the idea, came to me, and I said, boy, that's really innovative, and we're crossing the line here. But I just followed his lead, truthfully. And I did inject some stuff, but Brian was very smart. And the other thing about Brian, we talk about great wrestling feuds. If he had lived, the only feud we'd really be talking about would be Austin and Pillman.
Yes, what a heck of a tag team they were too. I know you follow the present product to a degree, and have seen Brian Pillman Jr. in AEW, and in fact wrestled him. I believe it was 2019 in Vancouver. What are your thoughts of Brian Pillman Jr. as a worker and standing on his own, similarities and differences with his father?
Well, he retired me, that's for sure. And he, you look at Brian, he looks, I mean, you look at Junior, he looks like his dad. And he has some movements like his dad. Uh, I happen to really like him personally. I really think that he's going to break through, hopefully this year, because he has something really special. And he has it all. He has the look, the talk. He'll do well.
He's in the matches that I've seen, I've been impressed with his crazy athleticism. I haven't really seen him take on a monster type guy. Just out of curiosity, fantasy booking, how do you think Pillman Jr. would fare against, say, the Blood Hunter?
Wow, that's a good one that you brought up. I'd pay to see that, wouldn't you?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. You got me thinking here. Pillman has enough guts and enough, as Gordon Solie used to say, intestinal fortitude that and enough craziness in him that he would stand up toe to toe with a blood hunter. I'd actually pay to see that match because the kid isn't going to fold. You're going to have to really beat him. And again, I don't want to belittle a blood hunter's technical wrestling, but when he gets in there and he gets those red rats going, he's into this kill mode. And sometimes, when the only thing that fights with his head down is a bull, and he ends up getting killed. I just think that if Pillman's going to do this, or if it did happen, I'd like to see him put on a little more size. And I like to see him wrestle guys that are aggressive. No one's as aggressive as the Blood Hunter, but somebody that's a few guys a little more aggressive so he can get a taste of what he'd be in for. On the other hand, Blood Hunter would have to start wrestling guys that are a lot quicker than the guys he's been wrestling. It would be very, very interesting, and it would be a barn burner of a match. And of course, I'm going to go with the Blood Hunter, but anything could happen.
Yeah, certainly a main event in any building in either country, Canada or the United States.
Absolutely.
You do a very successful podcast, Taskmaster Talks, with John Paz. Shout out to John, whose content airs on the Hannibal TV, where you've really gone into extensive detail as to your tenure booking WCW during that incredibly successful time frame. And not to go chapter and verse into that again, but if you could, and you sort of touched on some of the deals that you were involved with the cruiserweights and the changing of the business. If you could point to perhaps your most proud accomplishment during that booking tenure, and if you had any regrets or projects that didn't come to fruition, that would be interesting for the fans to hear.
Well, without a doubt, it was convincing Hulk to turn heel. And regrets, I try not to have any regrets. You can't look like Satchel Paige, the great pitcher, once said, don't look back, something may be gaining on you. Hey, we all make mistakes. If we knew the answer, we turn to page 47 in the big book of booking, and know the answer. So it's trial and error. But if you stay your course, I think you'll be successful. It's like you guys. When you guys started, I'm sure people said, oh, they'll only be here one show or two. 15 years later, we're doing a podcast and talking about the great card you're coming up May 6th.
Well, again, it's about pleasing the fans and giving them quality product. In 2001, when the sale occurred to Time Warner, were you ever approached to become a part of the WWE in some capacity? Because I hear over and over again when fans, including myself, are talking about what's wrong with the product today in terms of the bigs. A lot of people will say, well, they need wrestling people doing the creative and less writers, and your name comes up over and over again. So be interesting to hear if you were ever approached to be a part of that in WWE.
I was an employee, so I had a Turner contract, not a WCW contract, and I had just signed for 3 years. I mean, I was only in 3 weeks when the sale got sold, when the company got sold. So I didn't ever get approached during that time. One other time we had some talks, but it didn't come to fruition. And that's when I just started the gym, and there was a lot of extenuating circumstances.
Would you agree that there's one of the, an AEW being its own sort of entity, but speaking mostly about WWE in the last 20 years, would you agree with a lot of pundits that feel that the product, even though it's at its most or ridiculously successful financially, a lot of fans are down on the creative? Would you say that that's a result of hiring Hollywood writer types and not utilizing people like Kevin Sullivan?
Well, I don't say myself, but I do believe that first of all, how could you give Terry Funk a scripted interview? But I got to take my hat off to them. This bloodline thing is it's the closest anybody's ever gotten to the NWO. In some ways, it surpassed it, and I'll tell you why. When we had the NWO, we killed the baby faces to get them over. Now they got the Usos and the bloodline over, yet they made Sammy, Cody, Kevin Owens. They've got 3 baby faces to go against them. You know what I mean? They did a great. Did anybody ever foresee Sammy going this far?
Don't think so. No.
And I mean that ovation he got in Montreal was ridiculous. And he is a very talented worker. And I think about Roman. The parallels between him and The Rock. Remember Rocky sucks. And then when Roman's out there doing interviews, fuck you, Roman, fuck you. Brother, it's almost like deja vu. I mean, they've done a remarkable job. And I think that has to do with Heyman and Triple H and the talent that deliver it the right way.
Maybe the Rock initially had so much heat because of the haircut. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, that might have been it in the blue and tan outfit.
The tassel deal, sir.
Yeah.
One of the fans wanted to know your thoughts on specifically the WWE Hall of Fame and the fact that there isn't an actual physical Hall of Fame. I know there's the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, which has a physical building. But what are your thoughts on? And I guess we're talking, the Vince McMahon era, where basically was an audience of one that made those decisions.
Yeah, I think eventually they'll have one, especially now that they're in Orlando. It'd be another amusement attraction that people can go and see. I foresee them having one.
What are your thoughts on who gets in and who's left out, and that sort of controversy?
Well, I mean, they're going to push their people. How the rock and roll, not rock and roll, the Midnight Express on in. I don't think there's 5 better tag teams ever. So, I mean, and I do understand their philosophy, you know, you got to have work for us. So I understand it, but sometimes they make exceptions. So, you know, it's their ball game, and it's their ball, so they can do what they want.
Ultimately, yes. In 2018, I had the pleasure of meeting you at the Cauliflower Alley Convention in Vegas, and I'm curious as to your thoughts of the role of the CAC and what could be done to further preserve we at the Hannibal TV. One of our goals is to capture and preserve the history of the business, and the CAC certainly play an integral role of that. How do you see that expanding in the future?
I think they really need to get some young blood in there. Young wrestlers, guys that have kind of cracked the glass ceiling. They got a great program. They help some of the guys that are down on their luck, but I think they need to expand, and I think they need to do some recruiting.
And do you believe that as a result of the CAC's mission that we're really that they are assisting in maintaining parts of the business that weren't necessarily WWE related, but still need to be recognized and affirmed?
Absolutely. When I met you there, I went and we were in that big room, and I went and saw pictures. I mean, of guys from the 40s, even before then, in the 50s and the 60s, and right up till today. I think it's a very integral part to save the business.
So, Kevin, you've been very generous with your time, and we've just about burned through it. But I wanted to ask you one last question. You shared some of your thoughts in terms of the modern product. What if you could narrow it down to a few areas? What do you think would be steps in the right direction to not only maintain the financial success that we're seeing of the bigs, especially WWE, but harken back to a product that fans of my vintage and around that time grew up being so enraptured by. And the reason I ask that is because a lot of commentators have said, 20, 30 years from now, we're not creating the memorable characters, bloodline notwithstanding, that seem to be commonplace with the territories.
Yeah, they need, like, here's something. They were flipping that belt around so much in WWE. Now they've made it something special with Roman having it this long. And now they've created interest because he's had it so long. Could Cody rather upset him? This is very, very great booking. I take my hats off to all of them. But I also think we're a business of monkey see, monkey do. Does everybody need to get in the ring and jump up and turn his back to his opponent and, pose? What do you think a babyface would have done if he did that to Bruiser Brody or Abdullah the Butcher, the Sheik? So we don't need to be such a copycat business.
Well, Kevin, I know that the fans of Great North Wrestling are really looking forward to seeing you on May the 6th at the Earl Armstrong Arena. Although the bell time is 7, we're going to have a meet and greet starting at 6 and during intermission. Is there anything that you want to leave the fans of the Hannibal TV with until they see you then?
No, I just want them to come out and say hello and support this product. I mean, 15 years, and I'll tell you what, that card is a stacked card, but that main event, you're going to see some horror, and I happen to love horror. So thank you very much for having me, my man.
Thank you, Kevin. And fans, that's it. Tonight's edition of the Great North Wrestling Podcast is done. We'll see you all next week. And again, big thanks to Kevin Sullivan, the legendary Kevin Sullivan, for his time tonight. Take care, everyone.